My name is Alex Bybel. I'm the Rivers and Streams Biologist for Region 2 for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. So as part of our management plan process for the Tims Ford Tailwater, we like to get public input. So a few weeks ago, we had an in-person public meeting at the Jack Daniels Visitor Center where we got input from anglers and they were allowed to ask questions and things like that. And we got some really good data, but we kind of wanted to kind of broaden that scope and give people a chance to get their input as well on an online version. So that's what this presentation is for, giving a status update. And then, we do encourage people to fill out the accompanying online survey. So some background, Tims Ford Dam, it's located on the Elk River in southern middle Tennessee. It's a TVA dam built in 1970s. And like most TVA dams, it's managed for multiple usage. So, power generation, flood control, water use, but also they do have other considerations like, protected species. Tennessee is aquatically one of the most biologically diverse states in the country. So, we do have some protected species that we have to deal with. And then what I'm going to be focusing on today is a recreation. So not just, when you think dams, you think the lake above it, so boating and fishing there, but the tailwaters also offer some recreation, particularly in the form of cold water fisheries. So the current operational plan that TVA is operating on for the Tims Ford Dam, I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts of it, but they are managing a little bit differently than other TVA dams. So they're actually managing for warmer water. So about 40 miles downstream in Fayetteville, we do have an endangered species of boulder darter, which is found pretty much only in Elk River. So we're trying to keep, more natural regimes, natural temperatures for that fish, but that does still give us, there is cold water coming out of the dam that gives us a cooler water fishery for that first few miles below the dam. So just some background on the trout fishery. So we do obviously stock it with trout, primarily by Dale Hollow National Fish Hatchery. So rainbow trout, brown trout, cutthroat trout, and brook trout are the species we stock, and I'll get into the specifics of that in a little bit. And then we do have 3 public access points on the tailwater. Highway 50, there is bank and wading access as well as float access. And then 8 miles down from that, Ferris Creek, there's access there as well. And then kind of another 5.5 miles down from that, Old Dam Ford is kind of out of what's considered the tailwater trout fishery, but can still offer a pullout for floating access. And again, that green kind of line there on the map is your kind of year-round trout habitat, which goes from the dam and ends at about Beans Creek. And the way we have been figuring that out is by temperature. So trout, a cold water fish. Obviously, warm summer temps, Tennessee naturally, apart from the tailwater, it's warm water. So those summer temps can be a problem. This graph here in green is Old Dam Ford, and blue is Ferris Creek. And the lines there, so at 68 degrees Fahrenheit is when trout tend to be stressed, and at long periods of times can experience mortalities. And that kind of, once you get to that red line, is when that becomes a lot more that'll happen in a lot shorter span. So as you can see, throughout the course of the summer, Old Dam Ford spent a lot of time over that stress level and even shoots up close to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not good for the trout, and they'll either not want to be there or they're not going to be able to survive there. And we do see even on that lower end of the tailwater, Ferris Creek, we do occasionally get into that stress level as well. So we do a lot of monitoring of our trout populations in the tailwater. So we do this in 2 ways. So on the biological side, we do electrofishing. We've been doing it since 2005. We go out there in the spring and do an electrofishing sample. So we're collecting, collecting trout, seeing, how many we get, how many, what the length is, what the weight is, which gives us kind of an idea of what the survival and what the growth of these fish is. And then on the other side, the angler use sides, we do creel. So we don't do that every year just because it's a much more involved process. We'll do it every couple of years, but we'll go out, we'll ask people what they're catching, see how many they're catching, what their opinions of the tailwater is, really what the usage is. So we take all this monitoring data, and we do currently have a management plan. So it was in 2017 is our kind of current one, and we are in the process of updating that with a pretty simple goal of just, producing the best quality trout fishery we can in the Tims Ford Tailwater. And to do that, we'd like to provide a put and take fishery for species like rainbow, brook trout, and since 2022, cutthroat trout, but also by providing the chance to catch some of these larger trophy fish, which we do with brown trout. So if you're going to have, goals for your management plan, you need to have quantifiable objectives. So, and we measure this from our, with our monitoring. So objective 1 is kind of captured through the creel data, and that's, monitoring the amount of angler trips, the amount of angler usage. We're shooting for 6,000 angler trips in that creel time frame from March to October. So for objective 2, we're going to be measuring through electrofishing, and that's going to be, the growth and survival of our brown trout. So kind of objective 2 is just seeing 30 brown trout per hour on our samples. Objective 3 is seeing 5 per hour on those memorable fish above 15 inches. And then objective 4 is, seeing 2 per hour on those kind of bigger trophy fish size brown trout above 20 inches. So kind of how we're getting to these goals, I'm going to go through kind of the stocking and what we do and what we're seeing from it by species. So brook and cutthroat trout is kind of the smallest portion of our stocking. About 3,000 annually is what we'll stock there in that catchable 9 to 12 inch size. Now that's going to be dependent on the hatcheries. We don't have a lot of these species available to us, so some years we might not be able to get it, but when we can, it's an opportunity to kind of give people something new to catch. And we have not seen, significant survival or reproduction since we've been stocking it, so we consider it a put and take fishery. Rainbow trout are the majority of the stocking in the Tims Ford Tailwater, so we'll be stocking those from March through December, so the majority of the year at public accesses, so Ferris Creek and Highway 50. And those are also stocked in the catchable 9 to 12 inch range. But we do also stock a number of what we call retired brood fish. So these are fish coming from the TWRA National Fish Hatchery that have been used to produce eggs, produce fish that a lot of other hatcheries are then raising. And then once they're done with those fish, they'll give those to us to kind of release into tailwater for the chance to catch bigger fish. And those are typically stocked around 18 inches. Rainbow trout are also considered a put and take. We don't really see survival and reproduction on those, but that is a larger question that I get a lot, so I wanted to kind of show you what it looks like in the data. So this is electrofishing data averaged over the past 15 years, and I have it broken out into size classes. So the biggest takeaway is kind of looking at, most of the fish we get are in that 9 to 12 inch range, with a couple smaller, which, again, sometimes they're stocked smaller, sometimes, smaller fish get out of other raceways and get stocked with the bigger fish. And then on the other side, that 13 to 15 inch range. So those fish are in the tailwater a couple months before we sample them. So, there is going to be some growth on that, and that's what you see. And then once you hit the 16 to 17 inches, those might be the fish that may have survived a summer. But again, as you can see, that's the smallest amount that we see. So it's just not really a significant amount. And then once you hit 18 inches, those are the brood fish. So, and we've never sampled a rainbow trout above 20 inches in Tims Ford Tailwater. So brown trout are a little bit of a different story. So we will stock 20,000 of them. We only stock those in the spring, typically April through May. And we'll stock these throughout the tailwater in a bit smaller in that 6 to 8 inch size range. And the reason we do this is because these fish can survive in Tims Ford tailwaters, at least a number of them do. So the idea is, give them the chance to spread out and grow and give the chance to catch bigger fish. And so with that, that's the reason why we have our only special regulation for trout in Tims Ford Tailwater, that being our 20 inch minimum limit of 1 per day regulation on those brown trout. Well, we put this in place in 2016 with the idea being that, this eliminates kind of the harvest as a factor in, reducing the number of those fish. So, the best chance for them to grow up to those larger sizes. So we do have quantifiable objectives related to the brown trout, with those being objectives 2 through 4, and kind of what that looks like. So this is a kind of simplified graph of our electrofishing catch over the past 20 years. And the two kind of things to keep in mind is those gray lines. 2008 is when that flow regime for TVA went in place, and in 2016 is when we put in that 20 inch minimum size limit. So again, you can see that green dotted line is our goal of 30 brown trout per hour. And keep in mind that our electrofishing samples will vary over the years, so it's not going to be a straight line even if the population was the same. But as you can see, in the past few years, we haven't been meeting our goal. And if you kind of break that out to the 15 inch trout, that goal of 5 per hour, we did have a spike in about 2017, 2018 post that regulation implementation, but that's not something that's seemed to have carried through the past couple of years. And again, you see a similar thing with the 20 inch brown trout, those wanting those over 2 fish per hour. We haven't met that really since about 2012, 2011. So ultimately, on those objectives 2 through 4, did we meet our objectives? We haven't. But the question is are these objectives obtainable? So, even since 2005, there hasn't been a year that we've been able to meet all 3 of those in a single year. And, part of the reason of that is they were put in place, post that regulation. The idea is that we'd see more growth, more survival of those fish. So we kind of had some lofty goals, and it just doesn't seem to have gone that way. We kind of see them, the population has kind of stayed the same, and some years maybe been a little bit less. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the regulation is bad or say is hurting the fish, but more than likely we do have some other things going on, some other factors that could be affecting things. And one thing that we're really wanting to look into is that temperature. So remembering back to the graph at the beginning, even Ferris Creek had times where it was a little bit uncomfortable for those trout. So, this year we put out more temp loggers throughout the tailwater to really nail down where, the warm water is and, what that tailwater looks like for those trout throughout the year. Another thing to bring up is with those larger rainbow trout that we are stocking, the idea of this objective 2 for 4 is providing, big fish for people to catch. Do those brood trout kind of help fulfill that need? Are people, just as happy to catch those rainbow trout? That's something we're interested in knowing from everybody. So I went out of order on my objectives, but we'll kind of finish with objective 1 because it kind of ties everything together. That being, are we providing a fishery that's, sustaining 6,000 angler trips, that people are wanting to come back and continue to fish the Tims Ford Tailwater? So looking at our angler type, we're at about 28% fly fishermen, 37% are using some sort of an artificial lure, and 35% are using bait, so worms, corn, things like that. So it's a pretty diverse group of anglers we have at the tailwater. One metric I really like to look at is the angler catch rate. So it's a good indication of how our anglers are doing in the tailwater. So it's measured in fish per hour. So if you were out there fishing the tailwater, like how many fish would you catch in that hour? So if you caught 1, your catch rate would be 1 per hour. 0.07 in our statewide management plan and our Tims Ford management plan is considered good for these areas. And if you can see from the graph, in the past 3 creels, we've stayed kind of above that in that 1.5 range, so almost double, which is really good. And obviously people are catching fish, which is good to see. So did we meet our objectives for objective 1? So yeah, we did. About a little under 6,800 angler trips were recorded in 2018. And once we kind of sort through the creel data for 2024, we expect to see similar, if not a little bit higher numbers. But the thing to keep in mind is even though we have a good, the number of people fishing, with those catch rate, people are still catching fish, and obviously they are still coming back and fishing, which is ultimately what we want to see. So that's kind of the outline of what's going on biologically in the tailwater and kind of what we're seeing from the creel data, but ultimately we need to hear from everybody in the public because that's only one part of it. So we do have an online survey that's going out. It's going to be attached to this presentation, but also being sent out via email to a number of people. And we do encourage you to take that survey if you have any interest in fishing the tailwater, because that's really good data for us to have to kind of know your values, know what you want to see in the fishery, that we can incorporate that and really make, the Tims Ford Tailwater the best fishery it can be for the next several years. Thank you.